He sat in my father's chair and told me I didn't belong in our family business. After a lifetime keeping the factory alive, my own brother erased me with a single sentence. I walked out thinking I'd lost everything, until I remembered one dusty document my grandfather had left in my name. I was 32 the day my little brother told me I didn't belong in the family business. The words themselves were simple, but the way he said them, that's what burned. Calm, smug, like he was finally saying out loud what he'd been thinking about me for years. "You're just not a fit for where we're taking this company, Nate," he said, leaning back in Dad's old leather chair like he'd been born in it. "You're too, small picture. This is bigger than you now." I remember staring at him across the desk, my palms damp, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. Behind him, through the office window, I could see the smokestacks of our factory cutting into the gray Ohio sky, the same smokestacks I'd watched since I was a kid sweeping floors on summer breaks. Our last name, Hartman, was still painted in big fading letters on the main warehouse wall. Hartman Tool and Die. My grandfather had hung that sign the year I was born. Now my own brother was looking at me like I was some intern he'd be doing a favor by firing gently. "Small picture," I repeated, my voice coming out hoarser than I wanted. "Eli, I've been running that plant for 10 years. I know every line, every machine, every guy on the floor by name. How is that small picture?" He gave a soft laugh, annoyed but amused, like I was a kid arguing past his bedtime. "Exactly, Nate. You're great with the guys on the floor. You're solid, dependable. But we're talking private equity, expansions, strategic acquisitions. We need vision. You well." He spread his hands as if the rest was too obvious to spell out. "You're a good operations guy. Nothing wrong with that. Just not executive material." For a second I couldn't breathe. I felt the familiar flicker of anger, but underneath it something else. Old, tired, bone-deep disappointment. Because this wasn't the first time I'd heard a version of that sentence. I'd heard it in different words my entire life. Growing up, our house was 2 blocks from the factory. The air always smelled faintly of oil and hot metal. Even in winter, with the windows shut, you could hear the presses, deep, rhythmic thuds that shook the dishes in the cabinets. My grandfather, Henry Hartman, used to hoist me up onto his knee in that same leather chair and point out the window. "See that, Nate?" he'd say, his voice rough from decades on the floor. "That's our land. Hartman land. We built everything on it. Never forget, if you take care of the ground takes care of you." As a kid, I didn't really understand what he meant. I just liked the way he said, "our," like it wrapped me in something bigger than myself. Eli never heard those speeches. By the time he was old enough to sit still, Grandpa's lungs were giving out, and he spent more time wheezing in the den than holding court in the office. Eli grew up with a different soundtrack. Mom's whispers about college and potential, Dad's late-night talks about the next generation of leadership. We were only 3 years apart, but sometimes it felt like we'd been born on different planets. I was the kid who came straight home from school and went to the plant, who begged to ride in the forklift and asked 1,000 questions about how the CNC machines worked. My reward was greasy hands and the occasional smile from Grandpa. Eli was the one in clean shirts, fresh from soccer practice or debate club, who could walk into a room of Dad's clients at 13 and charm all of them. He had Mom's smile and Dad's quick tongue, and adults loved him on sight. "Nate's our worker bee," Dad used to say at the dinner table, clapping me on the back, not unkindly. "Eli's our salesman. Between the two of them, this company's set for life." He'd laugh when he said it, but the message was clear. My lane was the factory. Eli's was the office. I accepted it. I almost wore it like a badge. When Dad started bringing Eli to shareholder meetings, I didn't complain. When Mom framed Eli's business school acceptance letter and put it on the mantle, I just smiled and said congratulations. I was too busy keeping the damn place running to worry about where my name sat on letterhead. By 23, I was working full-time as a line supervisor, nights and weekends included. Eli was off at Ohio State, sending home photos from football games and internships with glossy firms whose names I couldn't pronounce. By 27, after Grandpa died and Dad's health started to slide, I was effectively running the plant. Stock orders, maintenance schedules, safety inspections. I slept with my phone next to my head in case a compressor went down at 3 a.m. The guys on the floor called me boss way before my title caught up. I ate with them in the break room, stood beside them when we negotiated better safety gear, showed up at their kids' birthday parties. I bled Hartman blue. I thought that counted for something. Then Eli came back from business school with a tailored suit and a shiny new degree, and suddenly the tone shifted. He walked into the office on his first day with that trademark grin and hugged Mom, clapped Dad on the back, then turned to me with a smirk. "So this is the famous plant manager," he said, extending a hand like we were meeting at a networking event. "Heard a lot about you, big brother." I shook his hand, feeling the distance in that grip. We'd shared a room growing up. Now he was looking at me like I was one more middle manager to charm and then step over. For a while, the facade held. Dad made Eli VP of Strategy within 6 months, a title that didn't mean much but came with a corner office and a company BMW. I told myself I didn't care. Titles didn't ship product. Trucks rolling out on time did. But slowly, the small cuts added up. He started changing things without talking to me. New vendors who offered lower prices but missed deadlines. Cost cutting on maintenance that made my guys nervous. Big shiny monitors in the office showing graphs and KPIs that looked great on a slide deck but didn't match reality on the floor. When I raised concerns, he'd smile that same thin smile I was seeing now. "You worry too much, Nate. Let me handle the big picture." The thing was, Dad sided with him. Every time. "Give him some room," Dad would say, coughing into his fist, his face pale. "We've got to think about the future, son. Eli's got ideas. You focus on operations. That's your gift." My gift. That was the Hartman way of saying, "Know your place." Still, I swallowed it. I worked longer hours. I put out fires Eli didn't even know he'd started. When a cheap overseas supplier he'd picked screwed up a crucial shipment, I drove 3 hours to a small shop I knew and begged the owner to help us out, pulling an all-nighter beside his crew to make the parts in time. We hit the deadline. The client never knew how close they came to pulling the contract. In the next board meeting, Eli slapped a graph on the screen showing improved margins and got a round of applause. He didn't mention my name once. That was the rhythm of our lives for years. Eli made the presentations. I kept the walls from caving in. Then Dad had his second heart attack. It was a wet, icy January morning. I was on the floor, shouting over the machines to a foreman about a calibration issue, when my phone buzzed. Mom. I almost let it go to voicemail. She knew I was at work. Something made me answer. Her voice was shaking. "Nate, they've taken your father to the hospital. It's his heart." I remember the sound in my head going hollow, the machines turning into a distant hum. I left the foreman mid-sentence, ran across the yard, and drove through sleet with my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Dad survived, barely, but the doctors were clear. "No more stress," they said. "You need to step back from work." Immediately. 2 weeks later, Dad called Eli and me into his hospital room. His skin was waxy, his hair thinner than I remembered, but his eyes still held that spark. "Boys," he said, his voice weaker but trying to sound strong. "It's time. I'm stepping down. We need a new CEO." I didn't expect him to say my name. Not really. But there was this stubborn, naive part of me that thought maybe, just maybe, he'd look at the years I'd put in, the way I knew the business from the ground up, and at least consider me. He didn't. He turned to Eli with a proud, tired smile. "I've talked to the board. As of next month, you'll be taking over, son. You're ready." Eli's face lit up like Christmas. He squeezed Dad's arm, glanced at me, and in that single look, something shifted. A line got drawn in permanent ink. After that, everything accelerated. Dad still came around in name, but Eli was the one making calls. He updated the website, had glossy photos taken, changed our official name from Hartman Tool and Die to Hartman Industrial Solutions. It looked sleek, modern, cold. He also gave himself a hefty raise and cut overtime for the floor. "We have to show profitability," he told me when I challenged him. "Investors like a lean operation." "What investors?" I shot back. "We're privately held." He just smiled. "For now. The thing about being in charge is it either brings out the best in you or magnifies every crack." With Eli, the cracks widened fast. He started showing up in expensive suits, talking about opening up the cap table and long-term exits. He spent more time in fancy restaurants with bankers than walking the shop floor. The guys noticed. I noticed. But in the end, none of that prepared me for the meeting in Dad's old office, the one where Eli told me I didn't belong. He waited until Mom had gone home for the day. It was late. The plant was quiet, the winter sky already dark. He called me up with a casual "got a minute?" When I walked in, he was sitting in Dad's chair, jacket off, tie loosened, looking tired but self-satisfied. A man who'd convinced himself he was carrying a burden too heavy for anyone else. "Sit," he said, like we were equals. I stayed standing. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, this isn't easy, okay? But the board and I have been talking. With where the company's going, we need different leadership in operations. Someone more aligned with our future strategy." I stared at him. "What are you talking about? I'm the head of operations." He corrected gently. "As of today, we're restructuring. Your position is being eliminated." I actually laughed. It burst out of me without my permission. "Eliminated? Eli, you can't run this place without operations. You don't even know what half those acronyms on the whiteboard mean." He bristled, color rising in his cheeks. "Don't be dramatic. Of course we'll have operations. We're just bringing in fresh blood. People who understand modern manufacturing. You've done fine, but you're stuck in the old ways. You fight me on every change." "The old ways?" I snapped. "You mean paying our suppliers on time so they don't cut us off? Doing maintenance before machines explode? Keeping guys who've been here for 20 years from getting axed so you can show a better number on a spreadsheet?" He threw up his hands. "This is exactly what I mean. You're emotional, Nate. This is business." My jaw clenched. "This is our family's livelihood." He looked at me then with something almost like pity. "It's my responsibility now," he said quietly. "I have to make tough calls. You don't fit anymore. You're too attached to the past." I felt like I'd been punched. "What about equity?" I managed after a long moment. "My share. I've put my life into this place. You fire me with no stake? Is that how this works now?" He hesitated, and for a flicker of a second, I saw a crack in his confidence. "There isn't really a share for you," he said finally, not meeting my eyes. "Dad never formalized anything. Legally, it's all under his and Mom's names. With him stepping back, it consolidates under me. That's just how the paperwork shook out." Paperwork. Years of 12-hour days, missed holidays, broken relationships because the plant always came first, and he reduced it to paperwork. I stood there, feeling the room tilt. The walls, the old photos of Grandpa with the first press, Dad shaking hands with their earliest clients, all of it blurred. "So that's it," I said slowly. "You push me out, and I get what? A thanks for playing card." He spread his hands. "I can do a severance package. Generous, considering. I'm not heartless." I wanted to lunge across the desk. Instead, I swallowed hard, feeling a bitter taste creep up my throat. "You're making a mistake," I said finally, my voice low. "And not just with me." He rolled his eyes. "I appreciate your concern. Really. But this is happening with or without your blessing. Sign the HR papers, take the severance, and, I don't know, go start your own thing if you want. You're good on the ground level, Nate. You'll land on your feet." He stood up then, walked around the desk, and put a hand on my shoulder like he was doing me a favor. "You're my brother," he added, voice softening. "I'll always look out for you. Just not here. This isn't your lane anymore." That was when the sentence landed. The one that would keep echoing in my head long after I left that room. "You don't belong in this family business." I walked out without another word. Down the hall, past the framed awards, past the picture of Dad and Grandpa breaking ground on the new wing of the plant 25 years ago, shovels in hand, smiling proud. Outside, the air hit me like a slap, cold, raw, filled with the metallic tang of the factory's breath. I stood in the parking lot, hands shoved into my jacket pockets, staring up at the low brick buildings and the smokestacks behind them. That's when it hit me like a bolt of lightning. Ground. Grandpa's words, from years ago, rose up in my chest like something I'd forgotten I owned. "That's our land, Nate. We built everything on it. Take care of the ground. The ground takes care of you." I closed my eyes, and in the darkness I saw another room. Another desk. Another day. I was 19, back from my first semester of community college, sitting in Grandpa's den. The oxygen machine hummed softly beside his chair, plastic tubes running under his nose. On his lap was a battered folder stuffed with papers. "Come here, boy," he'd wheezed, motioning me closer. "Got something for you." I'd sat gingerly on the edge of the couch, unsure. He'd opened the folder with trembling hands and pulled out a thick document. "Deed. Legal description. Parcel number. This land," he'd said, tapping the page. "Your dad and grandma don't care about these details. Your mom least of all. But you You listen when I talk about soil and foundations. You respect the ground. He made me look him in the eye. One day, people might forget who built what on top of it, he'd gone on. But the land remembers. I'm putting this parcel in your name, Nathan. Not because I love you more. Because you're the one who understands what it means. Back then, the paper had just meant responsibility to me. I filed it away, promised Grandpa I'd keep taxes paid, nodded through the dry legal language he insisted on reading line by line. Now, standing in the cold outside my family's factory, those words rearranged themselves into something else. Not just responsibility. Leverage. I opened my eyes slowly, the winter wind cutting across my cheeks. Somewhere inside the plant, my brother was already reimagining the business without me, moving chess pieces on a board he thought he owned. He'd forgotten one thing. Everything he was so proud of sat on Hartman land. And that land didn't belong to him. I went home that night with my head buzzing. I drove on autopilot, the same route I'd taken 1,000 times, but I barely saw the road. All I could see were two images overlapping in my mind. Eli sitting in Dad's chair, telling me I didn't belong, and Grandpa's papery hand tapping that deed years ago. By the time I pulled into the cracked concrete driveway of my little house on Maple Street, my jaw ached from clenching it. The porch light flickered when I flipped it on, a reminder I still hadn't changed that bulb. I towed off my boots, shrugged out of my jacket, and went straight to the hall closet. The top shelf held the things I didn't touch often but couldn't bring myself to throw away. A shoebox of old photos, a couple of trophies from high school baseball, and a battered metal filing box the color of Army surplus. I dragged the box down, the metal edges biting into my fingers, and carried it to the kitchen table. My hands weren't steady as I flipped the latches and lifted the lid. Inside, everything was still the way I'd left it. Tax returns bound with rubber bands. Insurance policies. A small envelope with Grandpa written on it in Mom's looping handwriting. And under all of that, the thick manila folder I hadn't opened in years. Hartman parcel, 17 acres, deed and survey. My name stared up at me from the corner in crisp black ink, Nathaniel Hartman. I pulled the documents out carefully, my breath shallow. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, but the ink was sharp, the notary stamp still clear. It was all there, just like I remembered. The legal description of the land, the parcel number, the line that mattered. Conveyed from Henry Hartman to grandson, Nathaniel James Hartman, for consideration of love and affection. I sank into the chair, the vinyl creaking under me, and read every line, this time like my life depended on it. When I got to the back of the file, a stapled set of pages I barely remembered seeing before caught my eye. Lease agreement. Between landlord Nathaniel J. Hartman and tenant Hartman Tool and Die Incorporated. My heart picked up speed. I flipped the top page. Dated 12 years ago. I was 20. Grandpa had done more than just hand me a deed. He'd formalized the relationship between me and the company. He'd made sure there was a rental agreement, even if it was more symbolic than financial. I scanned the terms. It was almost comically generous. Annual rent, $1. Payable January 1st each year. 10-year initial term with automatic renewals unless notice was given. There, in Grandpa's chicken scratch signature, was his name as company president. Next to it, in neater, more careful handwriting, was mine as landlord. I vaguely remembered standing in his den, signing where he pointed, not understanding why it mattered if we were all family. At the bottom of the second page, something else jumped out. Landlord may terminate this lease with 90 days written notice in the event of non-payment of rent or material breach of tenant's obligations, including but not limited to misuse of property, unsafe practices, or actions contrary to the long-term interest of Hartman family beneficiaries. I stared at that clause for a long time. Paying rent had always been a running joke between Grandpa and me. Every New Year's Day, he'd press a crisp $1 bill into my hand with a twinkle in his eye. Rent's paid, landlord, he'd wheeze. The year after he died, Dad had done the same thing once, half-heartedly, as if he didn't see the point. After that, it had just stopped. Life got busy. Dad's health slid. I was at the plant more than home. A dollar bill never seemed worth bringing up. I dug through the folder, looking for any record of payments after Grandpa died. Nothing. No amended lease, no new agreement. Just the original, still in force. My mind raced, connecting dots. For 12 years, the factory had sat on my land. For at least 10 of those, they hadn't paid rent. A token dollar, maybe, but still. There was a lease. There was a default. And beyond the technicality, there was that phrase: actions contrary to the long-term interest of Hartman family beneficiaries. When Grandpa wrote that, I'm sure he was thinking about safety or selling out to some conglomerate that would gut the town. He couldn't have foreseen corporate buzzwords and private equity pitches. But the heart of it was there. If the company stopped acting like a Hartman family business, the landlord had recourse. I wasn't a lawyer, but I could read plain English. I exhaled slowly, the knot in my chest shifting into something sharper. Not anger this time. Intent. The next morning, I made an appointment with the only attorney I trusted in town, Mrs. Carlyle. She'd been our family's go-to for wills, zoning questions, and the occasional neighbor dispute for as long as I could remember. Short, steel-gray hair, glasses always perched on the end of her nose, and a mind that missed nothing. Her office smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. When I walked in, she looked up from a stack of files and her expression softened. "Nathan," she said, standing to shake my hand. "It's been a while. How's your father?" "Recovering," I said automatically, then faltered. I hadn't visited Dad in weeks. Not since he'd looked at me with tired eyes and said, "You know your brother means well," when I tried to hint at Eli's decisions. "He's resting." She didn't push. She gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "What brings you in?" I sat, set the folder on the desk between us, and flipped it open with careful hands. "I need you to tell me exactly what this means," I said. She put on her glasses, pulled the deed toward her, and began to read. Her eyes moved quickly, brows knitting slightly. When she got to the lease, she leaned back, glancing at me over the rims. "You didn't tell me your grandfather did all this," she said. I barely remembered it myself, I admitted. It was more symbolic to me back then. I never thought it would matter. She turned back to the document. "It matters," she said dryly. "Oh, it very much matters." She walked me through it line by line, patient and precise. The deed was clean. No liens. No conditions. The land was mine. The lease was simple but binding. The company was the tenant. I was the landlord. "They've defaulted," she said finally, tapping the section on rent. "You have grounds to terminate based on non-payment alone. And arguably," she added, "based on some of the other things I've heard about their recent behavior, you could make a case for material breach as well." I swallowed. What would termination actually mean? She folded her hands. "Legally, you give them written notice. 90 days. At the end of that period, if they haven't vacated or negotiated a new lease with you, you can file for eviction, a forcible entry and detainer action. The court would look at the documents, the default, and, assuming everything lines up, order them off your property." I pictured the factory then, the machines, the trucks, the guys on the line who'd given me wedding gifts and asked me to be godfather to their kids. "Evict them," I repeated, the word heavy on my tongue. She watched my face carefully. "We're not talking about throwing a family out of a bungalow," she said gently. "We're talking about a commercial tenant, a corporation. If they lose the facility, they could potentially move equipment elsewhere." "Could they?" I countered, my mind jumping. "Most of those machines are anchored into the concrete. The presses weigh 20 tons. The cost alone might be prohibitive," she finished, nodding. "Which gives you leverage, Nathan. I'm not saying you should shut them down, but you asked what it means. That's the answer. This agreement gives you power you didn't know you had." Power. I sat back, letting the words settle. For years, I'd watched Eli wield power carelessly. Power granted by Dad's blessing, by titles, by other people's signatures. Now, in a small, stuffy office that smelled like paper and polish, I was being handed a different kind of power, one that had sat quietly in my possession all along. "What do you want to do?" Mrs. Carlyle asked after a moment. I stared at the lease, at Grandpa's shaky signature, at my own younger hand scrawled next to his. "I don't want to hurt the workers," I said slowly. "This plant feeds half the town. If it goes under suddenly, there'll be families who can't pay mortgages." She nodded, the corners of her mouth tightening. "I know, but you also can't control what your brother does. If he runs the company into the ground, the result might be the same, only slower and messier. Right now, you have a say in how this plays out. You can use this to force changes, to protect the business, on your terms." "On my terms." The idea was almost foreign. "What would you advise?" I asked. She took off her glasses, set them beside the folder. Personally, she said, I'd start with notice. A formal letter reminding them of the lease, the default, and your right to terminate. You don't have to pull the trigger immediately, but you put your position on the record. Make them come to the table, instead of you always going to theirs. I thought about Eli's face if he opened that letter. The smug certainty cracking, even for a moment. The realization that the ground he'd been strutting on wasn't his. Something dark and satisfying curled in my chest. Draft it, I said quietly. I want to send it certified. To the company. And to Eli personally. She nodded once, brisk and efficient. I'll have a draft for you by tomorrow. When I left her office, the sky was heavy with clouds again, but the weight on my shoulders felt different. Not gone, but redistributed. For the first time since Eli had handed me my walking papers, I wasn't walking away empty-handed. The letter went out 2 days later. Mrs. Carlyle had worded it in that dry, polite legal style that made it somehow more terrifying. It laid out the dates, the terms, the non-payment. It cited the clause about long-term family interests, noting serious concerns regarding recent management decisions and corporate direction. At the end, in plain language, it gave them a choice. Arrange a meeting within 14 days to discuss bringing the lease current and negotiating new terms, or consider this formal notice of termination, effective 90 days from receipt. I signed it with a steady hand. Then there was nothing to do but wait. Those 2 weeks were some of the strangest of my life. I wasn't going into the plant anymore. I'd cleared out my office in one painful afternoon, boxing up years of my life under the watchful eye of an HR rep who wouldn't meet my eyes. Now my days were empty. I woke up at 6 out of habit, only to sit at my kitchen table staring at lukewarm coffee, listening to the absence of factory noise. I walked the dog. I mowed the patchy lawn twice, though it didn't need it. I reorganized the tools in my garage until there was nothing left to organize. And I thought about Grandpa hunched over that deed, about Dad, pale in the hospital bed, choosing Eli with a tired smile, about the guys on the floor who'd texted me things like, "Heard what happened, man. This is bullshit," with too many angry emojis and not enough words. No one from the office called. Mom left one voicemail asking if I was okay, in that brittle tone that meant she didn't really want the answer. Dad didn't reach out at all. Eli's silence was louder than all of it. The certified mail receipt came back signed 3 days after we sent the letter. After that, the clock started. On day 5, nothing. On day 7, a terse email from the company's generic address. Received your correspondence. Our legal counsel will review and respond. On day 10, I was changing the oil in my truck when my phone rang. Mrs. Carlyle. Got a call, she said without preamble. From a firm out of Columbus. Big one. Representing Hartman Industrial Solutions. Of course they changed the name on the letterhead. I muttered, wiping my hands on a rag. What did they say? They'd like to schedule a meeting. At their office or mine. They sounded flustered. I think your brother learned about the lease today. I pictured the scene. Some junior lawyer bringing Eli a copy of our letter. Eli brushing it off, then going pale as they explained what it meant. I'll meet them here, I said, where you're comfortable. 2 days later, I found myself back in Mrs. Carlyle's office, sitting at the same table, only this time across from 2 strangers in expensive suits. The woman introduced herself as Ms. Patel, lead counsel. The man beside her was an associate who never said more than his name. They didn't bring Eli. That told me everything I needed to know about his state of mind. Ms. Patel was polite, but there was a tightness around her mouth. Mr. Hartman, she began, folding her hands. We've reviewed the documents you provided, and congratulations are in order. You own quite a valuable piece of real estate. I said nothing, waiting. That said, she continued, it's clear the original lease was more of a family formality than a true arm's-length agreement. Given the long-standing relationship between you and the company, we believe there's a path forward that doesn't involve drastic measures. Mrs. Carlyle glanced at me subtly. This was the dance. And what path would that be? I asked. We'd like to offer to bring the lease current, Ms. Patel said smoothly. Pay all past due rent. At a more commercially reasonable rate, of course, and negotiate a new long-term agreement with fair compensation going forward. In return, you'd withdraw any notice of termination. I almost laughed at the irony. For 12 years, no one had thought I was owed more than a token dollar. Now that the ground mattered, it was valuable real estate and fair compensation. What about equity? I said, my voice even. My brother told me the paperwork left me with nothing. He used that paperwork to kick me out. Funny how the paperwork suddenly matters now. A flicker crossed Ms. Patel's face. She recovered quickly. My client is open to discussing other forms of compensation, she said cautiously. But equity introduces complexities, especially given existing shareholder agreements and debt covenants. It might be cleaner to keep me as the landlord and nothing more, I finished. Silence settled over the room for a moment. Mrs. Carlyle cleared her throat. Ms. Patel, she said mildly, with respect, my client isn't under any obligation to make your life easier. He has a valid deed, a valid lease, and a tenant in default. You came here because you understand what that means. Ms. Patel's jaw tightened. Yes, she said. It means if this goes badly, the company could lose access to its only manufacturing facility, which would not be ideal for anyone. Not ideal. That was one way to put it. I thought of the guys on the floor again. The families. The mortgages. I also thought of Eli, sitting in Dad's chair, telling me I didn't belong. Telling me I was small picture. Acting like my entire life's work could be erased with a signature. I'm not trying to burn the place down, I said, choosing my words carefully. My grandfather built that plant. My father bled for it. I've sweated through more shirts on that floor than I can count. I wanted to survive, but not like this. Like this. Ms. Patel echoed. Run by a man who thinks the people are expendable, I said. Who gambles with the company like it's his personal casino. Who throws out family and tells them they don't belong. That's not Hartman. That's just ego with a logo. The associate shifted in his seat. Ms. Patel studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. What do you want, Mr. Hartman? She asked. It was the first time in a long time anyone from that side of the table had bothered to ask. I took a breath, feeling something settle inside me. For starters, I said, I want an accurate picture of the company's finances. All of it. Debt, lines of credit, any deals my brothers made with banks using this land as implied collateral. If anyone signed documents assuming the company owns this ground, we have a problem that goes beyond family. A tiny wince crossed her face. Bingo. And then, she said. And then, I said quietly, we talk about control. If I'm going to keep this land under them, I want a say in how it's used. I want a seat at the table I was pushed away from. I want my share. Not as a favor. As a condition. Mrs. Carlyle leaned back, a faint smile playing at the corner of her mouth. Ms. Patel scribbled something in her notebook. I'll convey that to my client, she said. I suspect he'll need some time to process. Let him process, I said. The 90 days are ticking. When they left, the office felt oddly quiet. I turned to Mrs. Carlyle. Think I overplayed my hand? I asked. She shook her head. If anything, you were generous, she said. You could have walked in here asking full market rent and immediate vacancy. You gave them a path. Whether your brother is smart enough to take it, we'll see. I nodded, but a knot of tension remained in my gut. Because I knew Eli. His pride was bigger than his sense. He wouldn't just see this as a legal problem. He'd see it as a personal attack. A challenge to the story he'd built about himself as the savior of the family business. And men like that rarely bowed easily. They usually waited until they were staring over the edge. I had a feeling we were headed there faster than anyone realized. I didn't have to wait long for things to start cracking. 2 weeks after the meeting with Ms. Patel, I was in the grocery store staring blankly at a wall of cereal when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the area code. Columbus. My stomach tightened. Hello. Mr. Hartman? The voice on the other end was clipped, annoyed. This is Daniel Harris from Capital Trust Bank. We're the senior lender for Hartman Industrial Solutions. I went very still in the middle of the aisle. What can I do for you, Mr. Harris? We've become aware, he said, of a discrepancy in the collateral package secured for the company's revolving credit facility. Specifically, the land underlying the primary manufacturing facility. There it was. The other shoe. Yes, I said carefully. According to our records, he went on. The company represented that it owned both the building and the land at the time of closing. We've now learned, through sources, that the land is in fact owned by you personally. He said it like an accusation. Correct, I said. Hartman Tool and Die, Hartman Industrial Solutions, never owned that land. My grandfather did. He deeded it to me when I was 19. The company has been a tenant since then. There was a short, sharp breath on the other end. I see, Harris said tightly. That's problematic. not only for us, but for your brother. Misrepresentations on loan documents are taken very seriously, Mr. Hartman. I assume you also understand what this means for your eviction action. I did, suddenly and viscerally. If the bank lost its collateral, their loan was at risk. If their loan was at risk, they'd come down on Eli like a hammer. They wouldn't care about brotherly spats or family pride. They'd care about getting their money back. Have you spoken to Eli? I asked. A humorless little laugh escaped him. Oh yes, he said. We've spoken. He seems to think this is all a misunderstanding that can be fixed with a few signatures. It can't. Not without your cooperation. So I'm calling to ask, do you intend to proceed with termination of the lease? I stood there between Cheerios and Frosted Flakes, my cart forgotten, the hum of the store fading to a dull roar. Part of me wanted to say yes. To end it cleanly. Let the bank do what it would. Let Eli finally feel some real consequences. But again, the image of the guys on the floor rose up. Joe with the bad knee and 3 kids. Miguel, whose wife had just beaten breast cancer. Tara, the only female machinist we had, who'd busted her ass to get certified. They didn't sign any misrepresentations. I intend, I said slowly, to protect my interests and my grandfather's legacy. That includes making sure this plant doesn't get used as a pawn until it's completely destroyed. If your institution wants to keep getting paid, you might want to have a frank conversation with my brother about how quickly he comes to the table. Silence on the line. You're in a strong position, Mr. Hartman, Harris said finally. I suggest you use it. We'll be watching very closely. After I hung up, I stood there for a full minute, staring at nothing. A little girl bumped my cart with hers and giggled. Somewhere, someone's phone chimed with a text. Normal life moved on around me. I picked up a box of cereal without looking at which one it was and headed for the checkout. It was 8 o'clock that night when the knock came at my front door. Not a polite tap. A heavy, rapid pounding that rattled the glass. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, heart already beating faster. Through the curtain, I saw a familiar silhouette on the porch. Shoulders hunched, head down, a suit jacket hanging off him like it was suddenly too big. I opened the door. Eli stood there, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight. The confident sheen was gone. He looked older than his 30 years, like the last month had taken a decade off him. For a second, neither of us said anything. Can I come in? He asked finally, voice rough. I stepped aside without answering. He walked past me, looking around like he'd never really seen my house before. Maybe he hadn't. The chipped paint, the second-hand sofa, the coffee table with a missing corner. This wasn't his world of glass offices and client dinners. He stopped in the middle of the living room, turned to face me, and did something I never, not in a million years, expected. He swallowed, blinked hard, and then he dropped. Not dramatically, but enough. His knees bent until he was sitting on his heels on my worn carpet, his hands flexing helplessly at his sides. Nate, he said, his voice cracking. I messed up. I really messed up. I stared at him, my throat suddenly dry. How bad? I asked. He laughed weakly, almost hysterically. How bad? He echoed. Let's see. The bank's furious. They're talking about calling the loan if we can't stabilize things. Our line of credit's frozen. We've got suppliers we can't pay. Payroll in 2 weeks that I don't know how I'm going to cover. And on top of that, he looked up at me, eyes burning. You're about to evict us from the land the whole damn plant sits on. He scrubbed his hands over his face. I didn't know, he said, voice muffled. About the deed. The lease. Any of it. Dad never told me. Mom never told me. I thought the ground was just the company's. It always has been. That's the problem, I said quietly. You thought. You didn't check. You signed things you didn't understand. His shoulders sagged. I know, he whispered. You think I don't know that now? He looked up at me then, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the polished executive. I saw the little boy who used to hide behind me when Dad yelled. The teenager who cried when his first girlfriend dumped him. I'm sorry, he said. For what I said. For how I treated you. You didn't deserve that. You carried this company for years, and I walked in and acted like I built it. The words hung between us. There's a part of a big brother that is always waiting to hear, I'm sorry, from the little one who shoved him, lied, or broke his stuff. You imagine that moment will feel triumphant. Like justice. In reality, it felt complicated. Because I also heard the unspoken plea under it. Please fix this. Please save me. Please make it not my fault. I can't change what you signed with the bank, I said. I can't erase the deals you made. The loans. The rebrand. Any of it. He nodded miserably. But, I added, I can decide what happens to the ground under your feet. He looked up, hope flaring in his eyes so quickly it almost hurt to see. I don't want to shut the plant down, Eli, I said. I don't want to put our people on the street. But I'm not going to give you a free pass so you can keep playing CEO like nothing happened either. He swallowed. What do you want? He asked. Name it. I'll do it. I studied him. I want the truth, I said first. All of it. I want full access to the books. Not the glossy board decks. The real numbers. I want to know exactly how deep the hole is before I decide if I want to help fill it or start building something new on the rubble. He nodded quickly. Yes. Okay. You can have it. Everything. I'll tell accounting too. Second, I cut in. I want a controlling stake in Hartman Industrial Solutions. His mouth fell open. You what? You heard me. I said, my voice steady. 51% minimum. I'm done being the guy in the background whose work you take credit for. If I'm going to keep my land under that building, I'm going to be the one who decides what happens inside it. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. That's my company, he breathed. No, I said quietly. It's our company. It always was. You just forgot that because Dad handed you the title. Grandpa didn't forget. That's why he put the ground in my name. Anger flickered in his eyes for a second. Habit. Pride. Then it died, suffocated by reality. How would that even work? He asked, voice dull. Mom still has shares. I have mine. You have none. I have leverage. I corrected. You need me more than I need you. We both know it. You go back to the bank with a temporary lease extension and a restructuring plan that puts someone they trust in control. They might breathe for a second. You go back with nothing. They pull the loan. You fold. And the only thing left on my land is a bunch of scrap and a bad memory. He closed his eyes, pained. I'm not asking you to walk away empty-handed. I added. We can structure it. Debt, preferred shares, buyouts over time. Mrs. Carlyle and whatever attorney you hire can hash out the mechanics. But you're not walking back into that building tomorrow as if you're king. Those days are done. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, he nodded once. A sharp, jerky motion like it physically hurt. Okay, he whispered. Okay. And one more thing, I said. He looked up, wary. You stepped down as CEO. His mouth opened in protest, but I held up a hand. You stepped down, I repeated. Publicly. You can stay on in some other role if you want. Business development. Sales. Whatever you're actually good at. But someone who understands the ground and the people is going to run this place day to day. Who? He demanded, a little of the old fire sparking. You? I thought about it. I don't know yet, I admitted. Maybe me. Maybe someone we bring in together. But whoever it is, they're going to answer to me. Not the other way around. He stared at the floor, his hands curling into fists on his thighs. For a second, I thought he'd explode. Then his shoulders slumped. Fine, he muttered. I'll talk to Mom. To the board. We'll figure it out. I nodded. I'll have Mrs. Carlyle coordinate with your counsel, I said. We'll put everything in writing. No more handshakes, and we're family promises. You burned that currency. He flinched, but didn't argue. He pushed himself up off the floor slowly, like an old man. At the door, he paused, hand on the knob. Nate, he said without turning. Yeah. He swallowed. Do you hate me? I thought about the question for a long moment. There were so many easy answers. So many sharp ones. I hate what you did, I said finally. I hate how you let pride blind you. I hate that you made me use Grandpa's gift like a weapon instead of a shield. He turned, eyes shining. But you're my brother, I went on. Nothing changes that. What changes is how much of my life I let you steer. That's over. He nodded, blinked hard, and left without another word. When the door clicked shut behind him, I leaned my forehead against it and exhaled slowly. It wasn't triumph I felt. Not really. It was something colder. Cleaner. A line, finally drawn where there should have been one all along. The next 6 months were a blur of lawyers, accountants, and hard conversations. Mrs. Carlyle earned every penny of her fee. There were late-night conference calls with Ms. Patel and the bank, spreadsheets that made my head spin, and more than one shouting match between Eli and Mom when they realized just how much of the company's future he'd gambled on short-term wins. But slowly, brick by brick, we built a new structure. The ownership got rebalanced. Mom agreed, reluctantly at first, then with growing resolve. to transfer a large portion of her shares to me, honoring what Grandpa had intended even if he hadn't formalized it on the corporate side. Eli's stake was diluted, but not erased. We came out at 55% for me, 25% for him, 20% for Mom. We signed a brand new lease. Market rate rent this time, negotiated hard but fair. Enough to make the company respect the ground it stood on, not take it for granted. Eli stepped down as CEO in a town hall that was painful to watch. He stood up there, eyes ringed with exhaustion, and told our employees that for the good of the company, he was transitioning to a different role. Most of them saw through the spin, but they also saw something else. They saw me standing at the back of the room, not in my old work boots and faded polo, but in a button-down and clean jeans, next to Mrs. Carlisle and a rep from the bank. They saw the landlord. We didn't install me as CEO. I knew enough to know what I didn't know. We brought in someone from outside, a woman named Carla with 20 years in manufacturing turnarounds and zero patience for bullshit. At first, the guys on the floor were suspicious. Another outsider. Another expert. Then she showed up at 5 a.m. her first week, steel-toed boots on, hard hat in hand, and spent 6 hours shadowing every line. She asked good questions. She listened. She sat in the break room and ate the same rubbery eggs as everyone else. And when she walked back into the conference room later that day and told the bankers that cutting maintenance budgets any further was a good way to get someone killed and the company sued into oblivion, she earned my respect and theirs. We built a new leadership team, a mix of old hands from the floor and fresh blood with real expertise, not just MBAs and buzzwords. We renegotiated contracts with suppliers based on relationships and reliability, not just the lowest price. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fast. But slowly, the bleeding stopped. We stabilized. As for Eli, he floundered at first. He didn't know who he was without the CEO title, without the big office and the automatic deference. He sulked. He snapped at people. He took a leave of absence to clear his head and went to stay with friends in Chicago for a while. I let him. For once, I didn't chase after him, didn't try to fix his feelings. This time, the fixing was for the business, for the people, and for myself. One afternoon, months into the new regime, I was walking the perimeter of the property with a surveyor, updating some old maps for the county. We stopped on a low rise behind the plant, where you could see the whole operation spread out like a model. The brick buildings, the loading docks, the trucks backing up with a beep beep beep, the plumes of steam from the vents in winter air. It's good ground, the surveyor said, half to himself, stamping his boot on the frozen soil. Yeah, I said quietly. It is. I thought of Grandpa then, his rough hand on my shoulder, of the way his eyes had lit up when he talked about foundations, about how nothing you build lasts if you don't respect what's beneath it. For years, I'd believed that meant loyalty at all costs, keeping the peace, swallowing disrespect because that's just how family is. Now, looking out over the land I owned and the factory I'd almost let slip away, I understood something different. Respecting the ground doesn't mean letting anyone walk all over you because their last name matches yours. It means honoring the values it was built on. Hard work, fairness, responsibility. It means drawing a line when someone uses your shared history as a weapon instead of a bond. A week later, Eli showed up at the plant gate. He looked better, a little tanner, less haunted around the eyes. He wore jeans and a plain jacket instead of a suit, and for once he didn't try to stride past security like he owned the place. He checked in like everyone else, got a visitor badge, and waited for me in the lobby. We walked out back, away from the noise, to the same spot on the rise where I'd stood with the surveyor. For a few minutes, we just looked at the plant. It's different, he said finally. There was a grudging respect in his voice. In a good way. You did all this. We did, I corrected. Carla, the team, the guys who've been here since Grandpa's day. The bank, believe it or not. Nobody does this alone. He nodded. I talked to Dad, he said after a moment. He's embarrassed. About not telling us about the deed. About, well, a lot of things. I nodded. I know, I said. He called me the other night. Said Grandpa told him once he was going to give the land to me. Said he didn't argue because he always trusted Grandpa to know where to put his faith. We stood in silence, watching steam billow from a vent. I'm going to stay in sales, Eli said quietly. Carla says I'm actually good at that. Talking to people, building relationships. As long as I stop promising them things we can't deliver. A self-deprecating smile flickered. Seems fair. It does, I said. He took a breath. I also talked to Mom, he added. She admitted she pushed Dad to choose me back then. For CEO, because I'd have been hurt if he hadn't. She said she never thought about what that meant for you. I swallowed, a sharp pang in my chest. Better late than never, I guess, I managed. He glanced at me, searching my face. I know you had every right to evict us, he said. To let the bank crush me. Crush us. You didn't. You used it to force change. To save us from ourselves. He laughed once, short and bitter. I always thought you were the simple one, he admitted. The guy who liked machines and hated meetings. Turns out you understood the big picture better than any of us. I looked at him then, really looked. At the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. At the way his shoulders no longer hunched like he was trying to look taller than he was. And I always thought you were the golden boy, I said. The one everything came easy to. Turns out carrying a crown that doesn't fit can break your neck. He huffed a laugh. Truce, he asked. I thought about the years of slights. The hurt. The night he told me I didn't belong. Then I thought about something else. About Emma, his 4-year-old daughter, who ran to me at family barbecues yelling, Uncle Nate. About how she'd look at us one day, trying to understand why two grown men sharing a last name couldn't sit at the same table. Truce, I said. We didn't hug. We weren't that kind of brothers. But we stood side by side, shoulder to shoulder, looking out over what 3 generations of Hartmans had built. The land under our feet felt solid. Months later, when things had settled into their new normal, Carla called me into the old conference room. The same one where Dad had once announced Eli as CEO. The same one where I'd been called in to hear Eli's verdict. There were no board members this time. No fancy charts. Just her, a stack of performance reports, and a cup of coffee that smelled burned. We did it, she said, sliding the papers across the table. We're back in the black. Modestly, but solidly. Bank's happy. Workers are steady. Clients are renewing. I flipped through the pages. Numbers. Charts. For once, they told the same story the floor did. Good, I said, a quiet satisfaction warming my chest. She studied me. She said, you could take the title. CEO, now that the mess is cleaned up, no one would fight you on it. I thought about it. About the weight that came with those 3 letters. Then I shook my head. I'm good, I said. Chairman. Landlord. Occasional pain in everyone's ass. That's enough. She laughed. That it is, she agreed. I walked out of that room and down to the plant floor. The smell of oil and hot metal hit me like an embrace. Joe waved from his station. Tara yelled something about the Bears game. Miguel asked if I'd be at his kid's birthday party Saturday. I said yes. I walked to the back of the building, to the side door that opened onto the rise. I stepped out, feeling the familiar give of earth under concrete. I knelt, pressed my palm flat against the cold ground, and closed my eyes for a second. Thanks, Grandpa, I murmured, for trusting the quiet kid. When I stood, I felt anchored. I used to think power was in titles, in corner offices, in who got introduced first at a shareholders' dinner. Now I understood. Real power is knowing what you own and what you don't. I own this land, in paper and in spirit. I own my work, my boundaries, my choice not to let anyone tell me again that I don't belong in what I've bled for. I don't own other people's choices, their pride, their mistakes. That's theirs to carry. If you're listening to this and there's someone in your life trying to convince you that you're small picture, that you don't belong in the thing you've poured your soul into, I'll tell you what my grandfather told me without words. Look under your feet. Look at what you actually hold. Your skills, your name, the relationships you built when no one was watching, the quiet contracts life has written in your favor. Sometimes the ground you think is theirs is really yours, and you don't have to burn everything down to prove it. You just have to stand on it and refuse to move.